Ever since I can remember, we've always had one of those old vintage Parker Brother Ouija boards sitting in our closet collecting dust. When I was a kid, I always wondered what it was. From the box, it seemed like a horrible board game, until one day I found out what a Ouija board really is, and immediately dug it out of the closet. I insisted on my brother trying it out with me, and eventually got him to play along. We put our hands on the planchette, and I began asking the typical cliché questions like, "Is there anybody there?" and "Can you answer me?" Other than my brother jokingly moving the planchette around to imitate an answer from some kind of entity, there was no real response. After getting bored, we put the game back in the box. I did a little research that night to find out how to make Ouija boards work. Many people said online that the most ideal environment when using a Ouija board is in a dark room only lit by candles. So when my parents weren't home, I managed to gather like 6 or 7 candles and convinced my brother to try it one more time. I lit the candles and set them around the table in the dining room with all the lights out. We tried one more time. I asked again if there was anybody there. The planchette began to move. I told my brother to stop moving it, but he swore he wasn't. I told him to move his hand away, and he did. It kept moving. My brother thought I was messing with him, but I didn't pay attention. The planchette landed on the word yes. I was only 9, so I was legitimately shitting myself. My older brother had to take over. He asked the question, "Are you a good spirit?" There was a 5-second pause before my brother's hand moved along with the planchette to the word no. We both looked at each other, and at this point I ran to my room and shut the door behind me, but he continued on with the so-called game. I heard his muffled voice come from down in the dining room, when all of a sudden I heard him screaming at the top of his lungs. I ran back downstairs to see what was wrong. He was holding up his shirt, revealing a small open wound that almost looked like a claw mark. He told me to set the fireplace immediately, and I obeyed. He threw the thing in the fireplace and told me to never speak of what happened to anybody. We have never used a Ouija board since. I got a call from my cousin who said that he, his brother, his dad, and his best friend were using a Ouija board in their basement. Prior to starting, they took a large porcelain doll out of the room because it was creepy, and placed it in the adjacent room face down on a pile of towels. My cousin took a short break because the board was just spouting nonsense and he had to go to the bathroom. His dad and brother and friends started asking the board questions without him. One of the questions was, who was in the other room? It just started spouting random numbers, and when my cousin came back into the room, his brother said that it wasn't working, that they were going to put it away, and he showed him the answer to the last question he asked, and he said, "Dude, that's my social security number." Then they started to talk to whatever started spewing answers out. It told my cousin he would die in the Air Force. At this point, they tell the entity they're communicating with to prove itself. It then spelled out the word doll, and they immediately got a bad feeling. They opened the door to check on the porcelain doll they had laid in the other room, and when they opened the door, the doll was standing up right in front of the door, staring at them. Everyone freaked out and ran out of the house. His best friend burned the Ouija board, and I think he temporarily went nuts for a few months. My cousin, for some reason, then joined the Air Force, and is on a base in Europe now. I had some of my friends over one night, so we tried out the Ouija board we found in someone's garbage. It had the board and the glass piece that you hold onto. The 4 of us held onto the piece and asked stupid questions, just messing around. At all times, one of us were moving around the glass piece just to try and fool the others. When one of my friends went to the bathroom and the other got bored, it was just me and one of my other friends still holding onto it. I asked the board when I will die, and the piece started slowly moving to the letter T. I laughed, looking at my friend, thinking it was him, but he just told me that he thought it was me. The piece then moved to the letter O, and then M, and then back to O, and then R, and then I realized that it was spelling out the word tomorrow. My friend let go of it, and it stopped moving, so I was convinced that it was him. But he swore left and right it wasn't him. But here's where it gets horrifying. The next day, while walking my dog to the preserve, My dog's collar suddenly snapped and he was free from the leash. He darted into the road and I immediately chased after him, only to hear the horn of an oncoming car blaring and getting louder. I dove as fast as I could out of the way, just barely grazing the car with my foot as it passed. But it didn't end there. The same day, while sitting under the ceiling fan in the kitchen on full blast, I got up to get something out of the fridge, and behind me, I heard a loud crashing sound as all the glass on the table was shattered and everything fell onto the floor. The fan had fallen off the ceiling, and I was inches away from being decapitated. I really don't know if I find it to be a coincidence that the day after the Ouija board said I would die the next day, that I had 2 near-death experiences. All I know is I'm never touching a Ouija board again. I have never really told people about this. We had a huge closet full of old board games, and one of them happened to be a Ouija board. I always wanted to try it out, but my family was always home, and I felt weird trying it in front of them. There was this one weekend that my parents were going to the city, and my brother was going on a Boy Scout campout, so I would have the whole house to myself for a weekend. It might have been pathetic that I was more excited to try out a Ouija board than to party with friends while the house was empty. The weather was terrible, windy and rainy, but I felt that a rainy night would actually make it more ritualistic. Around midnight, I set up the board in my dining room and dimmed the lights. I asked a bunch of questions that generated no answers, so I eventually put the board away and went to bed. I woke up in the middle of the night to hear a creaking noise downstairs by the front door. At first I thought nothing of it, but then I heard it again, and it was closer this time, closer to the stairs. I sat up now. At this point I was getting concerned. Another creaking sound, this time from one of the stairs. I was sure somebody was in my house. This was before cell phones were mainstream, so calling the police wasn't even an option. The creaking sounds were getting closer until they were right outside my door, and then they just stopped. It felt like hours while I laid there clutching my covers, waiting for something to happen. A huge strike of lightning momentarily lit up my bedroom, and I swore I could see some kind of black limb-type objects wrapped around the open door. I tried to hold my breath to be as quiet as possible, but what happened next was the worst part. My door suddenly slammed shut, and I couldn't help but let out a shriek. By now I was completely under my covers, shaking and crying and wanting to scream. All the windows in the house were closed, so there was no draft. I just knew something was going to happen, but nothing happened. I sat under my covers for hours, thinking somebody or something was in the room with me. When the sun started to rise, I finally snuck a peek out of my covers. My room was just as empty as before. I somehow found the courage to leave my bedroom and search for any signs of a break-in. Everything looked normal, though. No broken windows or unlocked doors. I then spotted the Ouija board on the table again. I have always been kind of superstitious, so I immediately linked the happenings to the Ouija board. I chucked the damn thing in the outside trash can and brought it out front to the curb. Since then, nothing has happened, and I didn't tell anybody about it. You wouldn't understand unless you were in that kind of situation. Then you would agree that nobody would believe a word you say. Nobody really knows except for the people that read my story online. I know for a fact that those events were linked to the Ouija board. I can tell you from personal experience that trying a Ouija board is a huge mistake. It was the summer of 2013. My friend had a vintage Ouija board that was allegedly worth a decent amount of money. My friend agreed to trade it with me for a video game that I never played, so I happily made the trade. I tried using it alone, but it proved to be just a scam. I didn't really expect it to work. I mainly got it just for the money to be made off of it. I threw the stupid thing on the floor of my living room and forgot about it. Everything was going normal until the next morning. I woke up and found that the 2 plants I had sitting on my coffee table had been knocked over, and the Ouija board was sitting on the table. I didn't remember putting it there, nor did I understand how the plants could have fallen over. Wind was definitely not an answer. I wondered if it was possible that I had sleepwalked, Or maybe I was half awake and walked down to get a glass of water and bumped into them or something. I moved everything back in place, but the carpet already had dirt stains on it. I brought the Ouija board box up to my room and tossed it on the floor. Things got bad that night. While laying awake in the dark, I was disturbed by the sound of a muffled click. I looked up, not sure what it was, and then I saw through the cracks of my closet door that my closet light was on. I had no idea how it could have turned on, but I got up and opened the closet door anyway. There was nobody in there, but that hadn't even crossed my mind. I turned the light off and jumped back into bed. Probably 10 minutes later, I heard the same clicking sound. Naturally, I looked to the closet and felt my heart sink a little. The closet light was on again. A mix of confusion and fear started building up inside of me. I once again turned off the light and cautiously got back in my bed. I found myself waiting for the closet light to click on again, but what happened instead was much worse. Instead of the closet light turning on, the whole room suddenly filled with light as I heard the main light switch flick on. I had seen enough and was out the door within seconds. I quickly pieced things together and chucked that old Ouija board in the closest dumpster. Nothing weird ever happened after that. This is a popular story with my family and most of my friends. Amanda is my brother's girlfriend. At the time of this story, she was looking for her first apartment and moving out of her parents' house. Her and my brother didn't want to move together since they'd only been dating for a few months. She opted instead to search for a roommate online. Browsing Craigslist, she found an ad titled something like, "Roommate Wanted, Females Only." This sort of thing was common since the area she was looking in was mostly young professionals. The listing was for a room in a house for about $225 a month, which was quite cheap compared to most of the other places listed. The occupant listed herself as a 23-year-old college student that wasn't comfortable with living with any males. The other roommate would have their own room and attached bathroom. So far, Amanda was into this place. However, the listing only had a single photo from outside the property. Amanda sent an email wanting to meet the occupant and tour the house. Within 30 minutes, she receives an email back with all the details and time to stop by. The girl worked late hours and wanted Amanda to stop by at 8 p.m. When Amanda arrives, there's a handwritten note on the front door saying, "Door broken, use back door." Walking around the house, it looks nice but slightly unkempt. Tall grass, weeds, dusty windows, etc. Still no alarms for Amanda though. When she knocks on the back door, an older man opens the door. At first, Amanda thinks that she has the wrong house, but the man reassures her and says that the occupant was out and that he was the landlord. The occupant asked him to meet Amanda since she was working late. He seemed pleasant and offered to show her around. Alarms start going off but aren't at red alert yet. First, the guy was clearly in his 40s, unshaven, and looked like he lived in his car. Also, only the kitchen light was on. As they walked around the house, Amanda noticed one huge red flag. No furniture. Nothing. The landlord was polite about answering questions, but seemed irritable to keeping the lights on for too long, rushing her around and only letting her look at rooms for a few moments. There was a single room that the landlord wouldn't open, telling her that it was the occupant's room and he didn't want to invade her privacy. As they walk down the hall into the living room, she notices the front door has a plank nailed across it. Quote-unquote broken for sure. Amanda's creepometer is starting to ding, so she decides to wrap up the walkthrough and leave, but trying to be polite. As she's given the guy her "thanks for the showing" bit, he perks up and states that he forgot to show her the basement. He claims it's recently furnished and would be a great rec room, and she should take a look down there. At the time, Amanda and the landlord are standing in the small hallway between the front living room and the back kitchen. In this little hallway was the basement door. When he opens the door, it opens outward to create something of a barrier between Amanda and the back door. The basement is pitch black. He smiles, motions down the stairs, and says, "Ladies first." What happens next is nothing more than a stroke of luck. Amanda gets a text just as some random person parks in front of the house. Thinking on her feet, she pretends it's a phone call and answers her phone. "Hey, yeah, are you here? I'll come out from around back and let you in. It's great, you have to see it." With a motion of confidence, she excuses herself around the landlord and walks out of the back door. She says the guy just looked at her like he was confused. Once outside, she sprinted to her car and sped like hell out of there. When Amanda got home, she told her mother and my brother everything. Cops were called. They took her statement and went to investigate. The Craigslist post had been removed. The house had been foreclosed over 6 months earlier. It was found out that the house had been foreclosed over 6 months earlier and the property had been abandoned. When the police investigated, they found that the closed room that the so-called landlord didn't want her to look in was where the man had been staying. There was a pile of old dirty blankets, rotten food, and empty gallon jugs everywhere. More creepy was he had plastered ripped up pages from porno magazines on all the walls in the room. The really scary part of this was the basement. The man had tied a thin piece of fishing twine at about shin level across the stairs about halfway down. The basement was empty except another pile of old blankets, a broom handle wrapped in leather belts, and a small box with a few rolls of assorted tape. I was up late looking for goalie equipment on Craigslist some night in the summer. I was only 14 and had no job and therefore no money, so I had to find the cheapest deal possible. I didn't really care about the condition of anything. I came across an ad that seemed like a steal. The pictures showed the pads, blocker, glove, and stick. They were all in visibly good condition. It was only listed for $50. That seemed like an insane deal. I contacted the seller via text and he asked me a few questions, one of which was how old I am. I responded 14 and he told me he's glad to hear that I'm dedicated at a young age. It didn't really seem weird to me what he said at the time, but now that I look back on it, I should have been wiser. I asked the seller for his address, but he instead asked me what town I'm from and that he could just meet me somewhere walking distance from my house. I didn't know how I felt about this, but I really wanted that equipment. We agreed to meet in the parking lot of the mall, which is literally down the block from my house. I stood alone in the exact spot I described for a few minutes, until I heard somebody toot their horn. I noticed a white van parked away from all the other cars, and then I received a text saying that he was in the white van. I replied telling him to come out with the equipment, but he said it would be easier to do the transaction in the van. I had a really bad feeling about this and hightailed away from there. I ran down the block, and when I looked back, I saw the white van driving down the street behind me. Now there was someone in the passenger side as well. I didn't want to lead them to my house, so I cut into some random person's backyard and hopped over the fence. I was on the opposite side of the block now, hiding behind a bush. Within 20 seconds, the white van passed by and turned the next turn, vanishing from sight. It was safe to run back to my house now. My parents flipped shit on me when I told them about it. I didn't get the tag number or a good look at their faces, so all they could report was a suspicious white van. The Craigslist ad was taken down, so I couldn't show it to my parents. I thought it was over, but that night, I heard a vehicle engine running outside. I looked out my window down to the street and saw the white van sitting across the street, but as soon as I looked out the window, the van drove off down the road out of sight. I haven't seen it since. I don't know if they saw me or not, or if they somehow found my address. It makes me paranoid to this day. I was selling a dining room set on Craigslist. I listed it for $1,200, but put slightly negotiable in the title. It was a good-looking set, but I wasn't getting any offers. I did live in the country though, so not a lot of people lived in my town. I finally received a call about the set. The man on the other end of the phone had a very shaky voice, and he sounded a bit off, but I can't really explain how. He wanted to check out the set to make an offer, so I gave him my address, and he said he would be over within the hour. I dusted off all the furniture one more time to make it look as nice as possible. The doorbell rang within 10 minutes. I was shocked. he must have lived really close, which in my area was very surprising. I opened the door and immediately felt uncomfortable about letting this man into my house. He was wearing a white undershirt with yellow stains scattered all over it. His pants were way too baggy and had a few tears in them. His gray mustache stained brown in the middle, and his hair a complete mess. Basically everything you shouldn't look in public, he looked. Basically everything you shouldn't look in public, he looked. He greeted me with a hello in the same shaky voice as before. I invited him in and he immediately caught a glimpse of the dining room set, since the dining room is the first room you see in the house. He began walking around really slowly, making weird sounds and making sure to feel every inch of every piece of furniture. I was very weirded out watching this and decided to break the silence by bringing up the price. I reminded him that my asking price was $1,200, and then he stopped, looked up at me, and gave me the most unnerving smile I had ever seen. "How about $500? He asked me. I laughed a bit at the insane offer, almost thinking he was joking, but when his smile turned to an angry expression, I knew he wasn't. I apologized and told him that's much too low for me. The lowest I would be willing to go is $1,000. The man then started acting even weirder. He put his hands up to his head and started making strange noises again, pacing back and forth. He then looked at me with a look of anger and hatred. This man was not right in the head. I realized it just then and there, and I needed him out of my house. I apologized to him again and thanked him for coming, which was the most obvious way of me letting him know it was time for him to leave. But he didn't move. At this point, the stare he was giving me was obviously a stare of malice. This man was much bigger than me, and I didn't think I could take him in a fight. But then the man moved his hand to his back pocket, and I quickly assumed he was reaching for a gun. I ran upstairs to my bedroom to my closet, leaving the man alone in the dining room. In my closet, I grabbed my .45, loaded it, and took cover behind the wall, sneaking a peek into the dining room. The man was gone. I went back to my room and locked the door. I called the police and took cover behind my bed in the meantime. It felt like hours before I heard the police sirens outside my house. However, I stayed put behind my bed. For all I knew, that man was right outside my bedroom door. Thankfully, I hadn't locked the door, and I heard the police enter my house. I left the bedroom with my hands raised and showed them my ID. They had me wait outside while they continued their search. I sat there for probably 5 minutes before the 2 police officers stepped out of my house, with the man in handcuffs. They told me something disturbing. He was hiding in my pantry closet with a loaded gun. I feel it's only a miracle that the police weren't shot at, but the thing that still haunts me the most to this day was the look that that man gave me through the window of the police car as it drove off. A look of malice and hatred, like the first thing he would plan to do after getting out of jail would be to come back for me. I'm still thinking about moving. I can't deal with the constant paranoia of that man coming back. All I can say that can be learned from this is to be very careful when giving your address to people from Craigslist.